no matter what the activity is that you do, after your work hours. I feel like it's so important just to ask yourself, how did this activity make me feel today? Did it fill my cup? Did it empty my cup? And just go from there. If I think that the day that this stops feeling life-giving, maybe things will change. But until then, right now, this is how I want to spend my time.
Hello and welcome to the And Both podcast. Here we are going to hear from moms and those in motherhood that are doing the thing that works for them. They are honoring themselves alongside the all-encompassing role and level of expectation that is modern motherhood. And we are going to hear from as many different people as possible in their own experience. So you can find people to relate to. You can hear stories that will make you laugh, make you cry, all of the above, and that we will come together as a community to support one another in a way that is holistic and honoring of the woman and the mother as a whole. Hello and welcome back to the And Both podcast. I am here today with Daniella Marchetti, and well, first of all, thank you for being here. Let's get that started.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
And so when your request form thing came through, I was so excited because I feel like there's a connection between you and a guest that I've had on before, which I'm really interested to talk about. But let's start off with you introing yourself, letting people know who you are and what you do, and then we'll take it from there.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm trained in health psychology. So working with, the management of mood and health behaviors. But my specialty really is in behavioral sleep medicine. So I devote a lot of my work towards helping folks with insomnia, with adhering to their CPAPs if they have sleep apnea, and other sleep-related concerns.
That's awesome. And so how did you get into all of that?
That's a great question. Yeah. So I actually became a mother before I found behavioral sleep medicine. And in that very formative postpartum period, when I was having trouble with my sleep, I also discovered that one of the most effective psychological treatments out there that have been tested with research and have huge effect sizes happens to be cognitive behavioral treatment for insomnia. And so at the time, it was very much me search, like that research that's very self-interested. And when I saw like the personal changes that I had made just by implementing these things myself, I was sold with behavioral sleep medicine. Because it's one thing to see how effective something is on paper and to read research articles. But when I saw the changes that I was making, I thought, okay, I really believe in this and I want to help other people with this. So I just kept going from there.
That's amazing. It's that piece of like when you have an intervention that's related to something like sleep, like you either start sleeping better or you don't. Like there's no like, I kind of think this is working, I kind of maybe. That's really cool. So what are some of the things that you did?
Sure. So the most important thing, I think, is that I had to establish a regular bedtime and rise time. No matter how I slept that night, I needed to get out of bed at the same time the next morning. Because I think it can be so tempting to say, oh, I didn't sleep well. Let me stay a little bit longer in bed, or let me sleep in on the weekends to catch up on sleep that I missed during the week. But that actually sets you back. It creates something called social jet lag, where even though you're not traveling across time zones, your body thinks that you are because you moved or shifted your sleep cycle a couple hours forward or a couple hours back, depending on what you did. So keeping a regular bedtime and rise time was really essential, as well as limiting, what I did in bed. With the pandemic as well, I think so many remote workers are tempted maybe to do more activities in their bedrooms or in their beds, like, work, eat in bed, watch TV, these kinds of things. But that actually also works against us when it comes to sleep.
Yeah, I think that, so my background's in occupational therapy, and we talk a lot about like routine development and that idea of having spaces for functions. And if you have like talking about sleep routines and morning routines and pieces like that, which really overlap well with that, or they're from the same fruit from the same tree around like how to establish those routines. So I think it's pretty amazing. The guest that I wanted, that I have this connecting feeling with, is Mika Deshaw from Rested Mama Happy Baby. And so she came on, she was in one of the first episodes, and she talked about sleep routines for babies and helping them establish sleep routines and being a pediatric sleep expert. And so I think it's interesting that like we, as people who are adults, when we have children, we come with all of our stuff behind us, and then we have a baby and it's like, well, sleep is important, so I'm going to do all of these things, yet we still have this disconnect between what we're trying to do for teaching a baby how to sleep and routines and those pieces. Yet we're like, we stay up late, or we sleep in, or we do all of these things where like we can say to somebody else, or try and say, this is what's really best for you. But like you.
Yeah. I think that's so funny. I experienced that just generally in motherhood, and I realized it with my firstborn. It's like I'm willing to jump through all the hoops, read all the nutrition labels. I'm willing to like check out how organic this mattress is, how breathable it is. I'm willing to go above and beyond for the safety and well-being of this little baby that I am responsible for. But then myself is like, oh, well, I can put that on the back burner. Like somehow I just like don't figure in as important as this child that I'm rearing. But, I'm sure as most mothers have heard, right? You need to put on your oxygen mask first before you can do that for those around you and all of that. Mm-hmm. But I think that's just such a funny universal motherhood thing.
Yeah. It's that idea of like, I'll just get to it later. But that's stuff that, that goes through all different facets of the motherhood experience, right? It's like we make the pediatrician appointments for our kids, but we push off our doctor's appointments. We help our kids go to sleep, but we stay up when they're sleeping to do all of the things. And also too, like, big asterisks in all of this is like the demands on mothers and the demands on parents and the demands of raising a child are exponentially more complicated than they were in previous generations. And so I feel like it's really, people have that idea of like, well, I'll just borrow a little bit of time from here, but then it becomes a slippery slope of like, now I'm up until 3:00 in the morning or 1:00 in the morning, and I do have to get up and I have to go to work the next day. So like, how does that, when people come in to see you and they might be in that phase of like, well, I just needed a little bit of time here, and now like I don't sleep, I can't fall asleep, I can't stay asleep, and all of this stuff. So how does that factor in for you meeting people?
Yeah, I'll say that, the majority of patients that come through my private practice are these mothers that, their child is now sleeping through the night. They've gone through maybe the first year and they've experienced the sleep regressions and all the things. But now that their baby is sleeping well throughout the night, they have somehow lost the ability to fall asleep when they want to. So what might have started as maybe sleep deprivation, because maybe there wasn't opportunity, like sufficient opportunity to sleep, has now turned into this like full-fledged insomnia where there is opportunity, but, the sleep just isn't unfolding naturally. And so I do see that a lot in my work, if mothers come to me, because let's be honest, I don't think a lot of folks know about sleep psychologists or what they do, or that this is even first line treatment, above sleep medication. So if they come to me, it's, when this has already become, a deeply ingrained issue. And it was born out of that, insomnia through repetition, maybe not keeping boundaries, in that period when it was so important.
I love that, because I think to that point, like people think that there's like really, 3 solutions. 1, like this is just what it is to be a mom. Like you just don't sleep ever again. 2, you can take medication because that's a simple solution that has side effects and impact the long term and all of those pieces. However, for someone who's like desperately, I just need sleep now, or the focus is still outward, right? Like the focus is still on, your baby sleeping. And then if you have another baby, and then you just sort of get stuck in that loop of like, well, I'm doing this for. So I think that it's amazing that there's another alternative that doesn't say, okay, here's a pill or this is your problem now, but like saying, okay, this is a problem, but we need to figure out a way to do this that doesn't involve a quick fix, because it is a long-term solution, because we're teaching our children how to sleep because we know that it's a long-term skill to be able to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so CBTI seeks to do just that, right? You come in, you learn these skills. There are behavioral approaches, there are cognitive approaches. The idea is that treatment is short term. So while I know that there are some people that like enjoy having like long-term therapy, and there's a place for that, certainly, like where you see someone for months or even years. With CBTI, it very much is you come in, you learn these skills, you apply them, your sleep improves, and then I'm obsolete. So the idea is that you get better in like 6 to 8 sessions. And I don't think I've ever actually exceeded 10. It all depends on how well things are implemented and what other, variables are going on in the home and all of that. But the idea is that it's short term. You come in, you learn, you apply, and then this is something that you have for the rest of your life. So whenever you do have another rough patch of sleep, because let's face it, we're all going to have rough patches, even once we've mastered these skills. We all might travel or get sick or just go through a period of like, chronic stress. And so we're going to have these rough patches, but now you have these skills so that you can get back on your feet faster and you avoid this chronic insomnia issue that can be so debilitating.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Because I was thinking like, how long would it take for somebody to be able to say, okay, here I am at point A of like no sleep. So I love the idea. I feel like so many people I could refer out right now, just like put the bullhorn out, because I think that's the other part too that is a barrier, is people think like when you hear about therapy, you think about like a long-term situation, and it's like, well, I don't have time to put a long-term treatment plan into my calendar. So you see somebody 6 or 8 times, I mean, that's like, in terms of like people that have a chronic sleep situation that they are working through and they haven't been able to, all of that stuff, like 6 or 8 is not a lot to get back to a healthier way of doing that. That's cool.
Right. And you could, theoretically have the skills by session 4. The remaining sessions are really more of a let's troubleshoot, that there are barriers, let's problem solve, and so it really is depending on, how well things are implemented and, what other things might be going on in the home. But theoretically, by session 4, you will have all the information that you need to get back on your feet.
That's cool. Do you see people virtually as well as in person, or is it one or the other?
Yeah. So through my private practice, I'm doing teletherapy. So right now I'm seeing folks in the Florida area, but within the next month or two, I'll be able to see folks across 42 states because I'm in the process of getting PsycPAP certified. So I'm a big fan of teletherapy because I feel like it makes care just so much more accessible, particularly to moms, working moms or stay-at-home moms that really need to just squeeze it in and can't afford to maybe take a half a day off of work, right, to go into a session. So yeah, that's how I'm seeing folks right now.
That's awesome, because I mean, I feel like the again, pandemic is what it was. But one of the really amazing benefits is that because there was no alternative in terms of like being able to reach out and connect people, so much of that troubleshooting that people probably wouldn't have done for years and years from now, if not decades, because it's the way it's always been is to see people in person. Now people are like, well, this isn't working. Once, all of that comes through and you can see people in most states, like that opens it up in a huge way for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So now it's just a matter of getting people to know about these services, how to find, behavioral sleep medicine specialists near them, and to find that time to connect virtually.
That's cool. So do you do private practice? It's solely, or do you have, because you said in your private practice, do you do something else besides?
I do. So I'm actually also working at the Miami VA, so the Veteran Affairs Medical Center. So I do see and treat veterans there who, veterans tend to have higher rates of sleep apnea. So I do some sleep work there. But I do general psychotherapy as well. So I treat a variety of different disorders, across, anxiety, depression, PTSD, et cetera. But my passion and my expertise really is in behavioral sleep medicine. So I thought, you know what? Let me open this private practice. Let me devote my free time to this because this is really what is life-giving work to me. And so that's what motivated me to kind of start this side business.
I love that. There's, because it is true. Like there's so many needs at the VA level. I mean, there's needs at all levels, but in terms of like the impact of sleep and PTSD, that's like a huge pocket of need. So being able to like do that and then also have your own practice on the side. So I was at this group kind of conversation discussion. That's a long story, but they were talking about like, what do you do, in your free time and what are the things that you do to like take care of yourself? And, people go around and they talk about like different things that they do. Like we talk about every different person that's been on this podcast has something different that they do. And they got to me and I was like, well, I work. And people were like, that's not a thing. Like that's not self-care. And I'm like, well, in the context of what I do for work and the things that are important to me that I value outside of like doing all the other things, that means different thing to me. So it's nice to hear you say, this is the thing that I use my free time with, because a lot of people would be like, oh, side hustle. And this is a thing where it's like, this is a thing that like, I have this passion and I have this knowledge and I want to share it with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good observation because even things like, let's say, exercise, which I do, I love to exercise, but even that can become a chore, right? Or something that's like, okay, this is just a thing I need to do to cross off my to-do list, maybe even to like alleviate a little bit of guilt or anxiety I might have. So I think that even things that might be conventionally thought as hobbies can also turn into things that no longer feel life-giving or bring us joy. So no matter what the activity is that you do, after your work hours, I feel like it's so important just to ask yourself, how did this activity make me feel today? Did it fill my cup? Did it empty my cup? And just go from there. If I think that the day that this stops feeling life-giving, maybe things will change. But until then, right now, this is how I want to spend my time because I genuinely enjoy health education and seeing people sleep better. So,
yeah. Well, and I think people probably really enjoy the fact that you're helping them sleep better because
it's a two-way street.
It's a pretty essential function, especially in moms and parents. So how old are your kids?
So my firstborn, she's 5 years old, and I also have a 2-year-old son.
Nice. And how do they sleep?
Yeah. So, they're actually pretty good sleepers, but I always say, it's a little bit of a mix. You never know what you're going to get. Some kids come into the world and maybe their circadian alignment, it comes together faster than others. So it's so important to know that when kids are born or when people are born, our pineal gland, isn't fully developed. There's parts of the brain that are still developing after birth. And so that part of our brain that creates melatonin, right, that sleep producing hormone isn't even there for the first few weeks or few months after we're born. And so that part of development, it's kind of hard to know like, oh, my kid's melatonin, it came in today. We're going to start having better sleep. And so it's always good to have, those good sleep practices for your young ones, just as an insurance policy in case some of those, natural, sleep promoting like hormones, aren't there yet.
Yeah.
Both of them do well.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think that's also important for people to know because when you have a baby that is not sleeping, then you're not sleeping. Then it's like, like that it takes like one ember to make a bonfire, right? It's like when things are not falling into place, because how often, honestly, do they really all just like, oh, they all just fell into place and like my kid was born and then they slept and all of that. But like when you have this ongoing disconnect in so many ways, I feel like that's when you get to this point of like, well, nothing works and everything is bad. And it's like, how many people are at that point when it's like, you need, your kid has like a 3-hour nap and they've never had a 3-hour nap before. And then, or you get a chance to like, somebody comes in and says, you know what, here, I'm going to take the baby for a walk, and you fall asleep and you wake up and you're like, I feel like a whole new person, I guess. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that you mentioned that, because what the research is finding now as well is that whereas before there was this idea that insomnia in the postpartum period was a side effect of things like postpartum depression, now the research is shifting and finding that insomnia is actually a predictor of postpartum depression. Ooh. And so we had these studies come out that showed that, women who are feeling, just like disconnected from their kids, like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my baby? Why am I not, feeling this connection? Like, there's something wrong with my bond. As soon as they started sleeping better, those feelings all dissipated. It's like, oh, it's not that there was something wrong with me, or even that there's something wrong with my child. It's that I just needed to sleep, and I needed to have that, that moment to refresh like my cognitive faculties, to restore, to have that, human growth hormone get into effect and just heal my body, because, there's so much healing that needs to happen in that, the acute postpartum period too, right?
Yeah.
So so it's something that is incredibly important for mood as well.
That was when I came home from the hospital with my third baby. I remember very vividly. I was like hallucinating. I did not sleep the entire time I was in the hospital. And this is my third baby, right? So like, everyone's like, oh, you're a pro, like it's fine, everything will be fine, you know what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. I did not sleep at all. The beds were uncomfortable. You fall asleep and somebody comes in and pokes you or takes your temperature or like, all this stuff. They're like, now is your medication time. And you're like, okay. And I came home and I remember being like, it was like an out of body experience of like, okay, we like packed everything up at the hospital and we came home, and I had 2 kids who were 3 and 5 at the time. And they're like, Mom, can we paint and can we do this and all this stuff? And it's like, you exist outside of your body. And I remember I looked at my husband and I was like, I need to go to bed. And it was like 1:00 in the afternoon or whatever. And I went upstairs and I crawled into bed. And I did not get up for 5 hours. And like, my baby was fine. It's, the idea of like, you got to feed him every blah, 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 whatever. But like, I'd already kept 2 kids alive. So I was like 5 hour, whatever. I came downstairs like a whole new person. And it's just like, I still remember being like, holy crap, I just needed to go to bed. Like, I just needed to sleep. People came over to my house. They held the baby. They were like, whatever. And my husband was like, don't go upstairs. Like, this is a situation that needs to just like be where it is right now. But like that feeling of like being so far, what the heck is going on, to coming back and being like, no, okay, I just needed sleep.
Absolutely. And sleep is often put, in the back burner because we think, gosh, like, no, I need to be present, right? I need to feed my baby. I need to be like hyper vigilant of like what's happening so that I can be good mom. But what if we told you that if you slept better, you would that feeling would come naturally. Like you don't need to be awake at all times or to be on at all times to be that super mom. You don't need to sacrifice sleep to be more productive, because if you slept better, you'd actually probably be more efficient at your tasks. You don't need to sacrifice sleep so that you can, exercise, because honestly, if your energy is depleted, you might not get the most out of that workout anyway. So much of the things that we stop doing or that we sacrifice sleep for, we would probably be better at if we actually prioritized it. And the same goes for that new motherhood period too.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that, to shout from the rooftops for people is like, if you're borrowing from that, you eventually have to pay it back. And how you go about paying it back it's that, what is that quote? It's like, if you don't like make time to stop, like if you don't make time for rest, your body will eventually at some point force you to take rest, and it's not going to do it when it's convenient.
Mm-hmm.
We sort of like decide that like this is an interest-free loan, and it is not. The interest compounds in terms of like what we are going to miss out on, or the impact that that's going to have on our life if we don't take care of this basic need.
Exactly. Yeah, we treat sleep like a luxury, like a luxury item, but it's really one of those foundational things that
Mm-hmm.
we have to make time for.
Yeah. I wonder how many people that you meet with that talk about like because of this idea, like again, sleep being a luxury and this emphasis on hustle, and when you're coming like that going into the early postpartum, people that are like first time parents that sort of existed in this like go fast, go hard kind of mentality. And then you have this transition into parenthood. And it's like, okay, well, I'm like a high achieving corporate person, or like I have all of these things that I'm able to juggle, and it's fine because I'm going to have a baby, and then we'll just blah, 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 like that. And then how does that come out in the end when the message is still hustle and do the things and be all the things and all of that? Like how much of that do you see in your practice mentality
Oh,
wise?
that is so common, particularly among, again, just like in American culture. We have these idioms, these things like, all sleep is for the weak, or, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And, so that's very much represented in a lot of those, colloquialisms that we hear. And there is such an emphasis on productivity, and in our culture too, that, folks kind of keep burning and burning and burning. And I often get this question: what do you tell the person who needs to just kind of keep like hustling through the sleeplessness? Like, what do you tell them? And often I have to say, well, for the person who has no time to sleep, and actually I'm borrowing this from what we say about mindfulness. We usually say everyone should have 5 minutes of mindfulness a day. And for those of you who don't have time for mindfulness, you need 10 minutes. And so, so for those of you who feel like you need to hustle through the sleeplessness, like you're the person that I'm thinking of in particular needs to stop or slow down or start to prioritize or just change what you're doing around your sleep. Because perhaps if you were sleeping better, if you were, and not to make this as a moral fault or anything, but if the sleep was coming more naturally, you wouldn't feel like you needed to stay up late or get up early to maybe, meet all the demands of the day. Or maybe it's a sign that we need to cut things out and say no to more things. And that's okay too. Like those are things that we need to feel okay with doing.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing too, because there oftentimes I imagine you see people who are used to being able to say yes to all the things, and now you come into these hard boundaries, and so that's when you get into that borrowing situation. So really evaluating like, do you need to say yes to this because it's something that you feel like you want to say yes to, or do you need to say yes to this because you should, or you've always done, or whatever? But at some point, you only have so much to pour into so many places.
Right. And sometimes I like to reframe, maybe a no right now doesn't mean a no forever. Maybe you don't take this big case at work right now. But maybe, in a couple months from now when, when the dust is settled for you, maybe then you'll have more bandwidth. But what can you handle right now that isn't going to impede with your health? Because sleep is very much an integral part of our health.
Yeah. And so do you have like, is there a common sort of like, what is your, in terms of like population or timeline or whatever, like who's the person that you see most often? Like, is it the early postpartum mom? And based on what we were talking about, I doubt that, but is it the mom who's like, a year down the road or 2 years down the road? And how do people find the niche that you are?
Yeah. Usually my patients or my clients are mothers who've been kind of through maybe a year or two of, of having their child being brought into the world. So maybe after that first year or in those like first toddler years or even preschool years, because honestly, those in the postpartum period, they're just like fighting for their life. They're just like trying to get from point A to point B. They're not thinking about their own personal treatments. Maybe they're going to their like postpartum appointments, but they're not thinking about maybe therapy and all of those things, which is sad because I do think that during pregnancy, if that's how you're getting an addition to your family, that's probably the best time for OBs to say, hey, you're at risk for developing insomnia. 1 in 3 women that go through pregnancy develop chronic insomnia. And then 2/3 of women have sleep disturbances in the first 6 months of their child's life. So like that's really the period where there should be intervention and conversation. But most of them come to me years down the road when the dust has settled a little bit, their kid is sleeping, and now they've got this issue and they want to work on it. And they've somehow found me or heard about sleep psychology or other treatments.
Yeah. I love the idea of like having some sort of preventative conversation because in all likelihood, right? This is a guess. In all likelihood, people that are going to have sleep changes that are more chronic or more severe or extreme probably had markers before they even had kids of issues with sleep. And so I think that would be fascinating for people because when you go into these prenatal appointments and there's sort of this like spray of information and classes and, it's like go to a childbirth class and go to this and go to this and go to this. Like this seems like a really opportune time to tee up what you do to meet people like where they're at. Because I think when especially in the later stages of pregnancy, like everything hurts and things are weird and you've got reflux and all of this stuff, it's easy to push all of the sleep changes off on that because truthfully, it's harder to sleep at the end of pregnancy. But how does that change for people being able to go into pregnancy feeling like they've got the tools that they need to meet that space?
Yeah, well, I think, when we have greater self-efficacy, no matter what the task is, then we're more likely to feel in control. And there's so much about the pregnancy and postpartum period that I think feels out of our control that can be anxiety producing. And so if someone can feel like, okay, at least I have this toolbox, so I can handle this one piece of my life, I would probably, have, better mood. And if I'm sleeping better, then all aspects of my health are going to be functioning better.
Yeah, that's cool. So when you are not helping other people sleep and when you are not working at the VA, what do you do? What do you do for you?
Yeah. Well, I do enjoy exercise, as I mentioned. So I do have a Peloton and I'm one of those. I'm one of those that likes to work out from home. So that is a big part of my life. But as far as like personal hobbies, I am a reader. I do. That's actually part of my like wind down sleep routine is I love reading some really light, like young adult, new adult fiction. Like that's my guilty pleasure. And so I like to do that. I watch Formula One. I'm a big Formula One person, actually.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
awesome.
those are some of my yeah. Yeah, I come from an Italian background, and so if you're not cheering for Ferrari, that's like a cardinal sin. So,
oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yes, that's a big part of my personal time, actually. Like on the weekends, me and the whole family will put on the race, we'll put on quali, and it's cool to see my kids growing up with it because they get into it too. And yeah, my kid actually knows how to spell Charles Leclerc, which I'm like, wow, that's
oh my gosh.
I don't know if you even know how to spell your own last name, but you know how to spell Charles Leclerc.
I had, when F1 was in Vegas last year, was it last year? Two of my cousins took my aunt on, I'm Canadian, so I say aunt, but 2 of my cousins took her and they were like, yeah, no, it's going to be great. And she was like, I am going to F1. And she came back, she was like, I had the best time ever. Like, it's so fun. And she was like talking about like just the whole experience of it. She said it was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. I go to the races down here in Miami. And so I haven't brought my kids just because the bestial heat will make anything that's great not fun anymore. But I've gone and I've suffered through the heat because it's worth it to me.
I think that's cool. See, this is the fun part about podcasting is like you do really cool stuff, but also you have really cool other parts. And like people get a chance to see like and hear stories of whole people. Like how many people listening to the podcast are like, I love F1 racing too. And now I have like, or how many people are like, I love F1 racing, but I am not on Team Ferrari. Like, ooh,
yeah. And that's okay. Yeah. The last couple of races have been so I wouldn't blame you.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. And so when you think about like going forward, like is the plan, I mean, obviously you are pursuing like a certification to expand that piece. Like, is this an idea to, or like a want to expand into that space and transition away, or to try and juggle both? Or what do you think the future holds in that regard? Like, would you like to have more of this versus trying to do both?
Oh, that is a good question. I take that question maybe day by day. I truly love my work with veterans. I get so much joy because at the VA, I do run an insomnia group. I run a CPAP group, and gosh, I don't know if I could ever walk away from that kind of a position. I don't think so. But, we'll see, what each day brings. If I get a caseload that is no longer tenable because there are a limit to the number of hours in the day and it can't bleed into my like Formula One time. So, if I reach a hard limit, then, maybe I'll think about like what is sustainable over time. Do I want to scale bigger? For now, I would think that I'm getting a lot of fun out of like spreading health education, having even more of like a public facing profile as a psychologist is kind of new for me, and doing podcasts and being on social media as well. And that's actually been a lot of fun. So if I get opportunities to do like seminars or workshops or, any talks relative to sleep health, those kinds of things, I don't think I could say no to.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. But for now, I'm just having a lot of fun, balancing both of these things and being open to any opportunities that come my way.
Yeah. I think that's cool because the idea of like, in my own sort of history of the VA, I did research. I did doctoral research with the VA on PTSD and veterans post Iraq and Afghanistan. And the people that I met there while doing that it's such an incredible community of people that go to the VA, like veterans. But there's also such a drive to work with specifically this population based on, like having a family history with the military or understanding like the sacrifice and the commitment that these people have to the mission of, the military. And so it's one of those, I asked the question, not like, hey, what's your grand plan? But the idea of like, I feel like the VA and a space like that is a really hard place to transition away from because there are needs that are significant and that are ongoing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been there for a few years now at all different levels of my training. I was there as a practicum student. I was there as an intern. I was there as a resident. And I've stayed because I've really genuinely enjoyed my work there. I do love the community. I have, some regulars, and there is such a high need. Like you're indicating with PTSD, there's nightmares, and I do nightmare work as well. And so, it is incredibly rich, and they allow me to also do research. So I do have protected research time with them. And so since they've been so accommodating in allowing me to pursue my interests and allowing me to see the kind of patients and run the kinds of groups that I'd like to run, it's hard to walk away. It really feels like a family.
Yeah. And you have the ability to see. So, I mean, if you're working with somebody and you have a 6 to 8 session kind of sleep tool, like offering in your tool belt, it's more than an offering. But if you have this skill set, like you have a direct connection to a population that can benefit from this skill set, then it takes that piece out of like the education piece that you need to do. Like these people understand what you're offering and these people are familiar with that versus like the other part of it where you get into the civilian life and you have so much of that education piece that has to come before you get into the actual treatment piece.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the first two sessions are really, imparting so much psychoed, right? On, how does sleep work? What does CBTI look like? Like, what is treatment like? What can you expect? I personally love to geek out with like sleep regulatory process and like getting into the science of it and also the art of it. So I do enjoy that education piece, maybe more than I should. But yeah, you're absolutely right. For most people, like hearing some of these things, they're hearing them for the first time and they need to hear it because otherwise there's not going to be too much buy-in. Some of the recommendations I make may feel counterintuitive at first. Like for example, if I say, don't take any naps, a lot of folks are, attached to their naps. And that's okay. And this isn't a blanket statement that everyone should, take some nap, okay? But if I say that, you need a little bit more information. Like, why is this nap not good for my long-term sleep? How does this impact like the way that sleep, is regulated? Like that, there just needs to be that information for there to be buy-in.
Yeah, that's one of the things that like when we do routine work with people and talk about like what is your sleep routine and what happens around that, that's where you get a lot of like, this is just what works for me. And you're like, oh, how long does it take you to fall asleep at night? And they're like, 3 hours. Like, I think you might want to reevaluate. So like being able to say, this is why, and this is the piece that you need. Again, like you're saying, like that creates that helps foster that buy-in for people to be like, well, I guess 3 hours is a long time. And I guess like if I am going to bed at 9, but I'm not falling asleep until midnight or 1, I'm not actually going to bed at 9. And thinking about it that
right.
way.
Yeah, there is a difference between going to bed and actually lights out. A lot of folks like get into bed and then they feel like they need to do something before they can really, shut off for the night. So they'll get into bed and get on their phone or do something else. But I find that when I work with teenagers, especially, the psychoeducation pieces is very important because, oftentimes there's like delayed sleep phase. So they're going to bed a lot later and they're filling that time, with maybe some activities that aren't, sleep promoting. And so being able to have teenagers, also understand that I'm not just trying to say, like, don't play your video games, but that there is a little bit of reason why, like, the blue light in our devices might stop us from promoting melatonin when we want to produce it. And this isn't don't play video games. It's just let's be savvier about when we play our video games so that it's not impacting your sleep.
Yeah, that I feel like that's a whole thing all on its own, right? Like it's moms who are in this postpartum, like sleep is all messed up. And then I feel like that other huge group of people is teenagers who like, you're not going, I have an 11-year-old who is now in that beginning phases of like not ready for bed at the same time as my younger kids. And it's like, well, how do we bridge that gap? So that like, I'm not saying to you, like, you need to go to bed at 7 or 7:30 because you're not ready for bed. But what do you do in that space in between now and when you are ready for bed? And she doesn't have a phone because.
Yeah, probably a good choice. Truly.
No, the cell phone thing. I went to a middle school, like get ready for middle school thing. And the principal was like, I hate cell phones. He was like, it's just what we do. We just fight cell phones like all day long. We fight digital stuff all day long. But it's that idea of like, this is a huge sleep transition in your life. And like, how do you fill that in a productive way? Not necessarily like check the box is productive, but in a way that does not fight against what you're ultimately trying to get to.
Mm-hmm. And I find that sometimes it's even harder on the parent because that the child starts making that transition just naturally, like with their biology changing, with the onset of puberty. We see that they're not feeling sleepy at 7 or 8. And parents are almost at a loss of like, why are you disobeying me? Like, why aren't you listening? Like, we've done this for years. And now parents have to make that adjustment of, okay, maybe my child's sleep need is changing. How can we make this work for our family as well? And so even though I do get a lot of those like mothers within the toddler preschool era, sleep challenges, don't just disappear when preschool comes around, right? We've got all of these different obstacles at different, age groups. fun and unique, fresh ways to challenge parents, at every age and stage. So yeah, so it's, you learn as you go. You learn as you go.
It's just this constant evolution of like I always say, like, yesterday was so easy because it's over, right? Like, you made it through and you would, no matter what happened, like, that's yesterday. And today it's like a whole new bag of tricks, depending on the age and stage and where everybody is. So how can people reach out and find you? How can people connect with you? How can they do that?
Yeah. So if anyone's interested in working with me, like being a client, they're welcome to go to my website, which is DaniellaMarchetti.com. And they're welcome to schedule, free consultation with me there. If anyone's interested in working with me in a different capacity, like for speaking or workshops or seminars, then they can contact me the same way, just reaching out through my website. If anyone's interested in, sleep health education, just getting some tips and tricks, and some fun, like bite-sized information about sleep, then they can also follow me on Instagram. My handle is at Dr. Daniella Marchetti. And so I try to make it a community and as interactive as possible, see what questions people have. Of course, Instagram is not therapy, but, if I can provide health education, then, I have fun with it.
Yeah. I love, I agree. Like, Instagram has this, like, its little, like, niche benefit, because I feel like sometimes that is the little spark that ignites the, like, wait, what is sleep psychology? And this person is talking about this. And, like, I guess I kind of relate to that, but maybe, let's just go and figure out what it is. So it's like a non-confrontational way of saying, like, hey, here I am and this is what I do, versus like, I know what's best for you. You know what I mean? It's like you're just putting that piece out there. So I think that's cool.
Yeah. I've been having a lot of fun with it. I never thought that I would have like a public Instagram account, but this has been, it's been actually a lot of fun and really positive. And, folks have really good questions, and it's always fascinating to see what people want to hear about, because so many different things impact our sleep, from our lifestyle behaviors, what we're eating, and all the ages and stages kinds of information as well. So I try to, meet people where they're at, and provide as much evidence-based information that I can.
Yeah. And that's awesome too, because then you also get to, like, as you grow and, like, with speaking and things like that, it's like, these are the things that keep coming up over and over again. It's like public research on top of the other research that you're doing. So that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I think it's incredibly fascinating and so needed for this in so many spaces, but especially in the motherhood, postpartum, developing children, women taking care of themselves as individuals outside of that motherhood role, to really be able to do the things that they'd like to do alongside of the things that they are responsible for. So thank you for joining me.
No, thank you so much for having me and for really, lending me your platform to talk about these important topics. I hope that your audience has benefited, or at the very least have, started asking some questions about their own sleep so that they can, make changes, because everyone deserves to have good rest. So thank you for having me.
Yes, for sure. I echo that amazingly. Everyone needs rest.